Well, hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Nicola Watkinson, and I look after the international work at the City UK, and it's really terrific to be able to see and hear so many of you joining us today, and we look forward to a really good interactive session. So we've got a great panel, and I'm going to introduce them all in a moment. But first of all, please just let me say a few words about the work that I do together with my fabulous colleague, Emma Reynolds, who covers the domestic policy side of things here at the City UK. And together we cover the full spectrum of issues that you will need to be thinking about. Because at the end of the day, all of the international work starts with domestic policy. You can't export if companies are not competitive, and you can't attract investment if the environment here is not attractive compared to other jurisdictions around the world. But to get the growth we need, we also need to look at new markets and new products and services that we can offer to them. And that's really where the international strategy comes into play. So we launched an international strategy last year in September, and it outlined how the UK can regain its position as the leading international financial centre within 5 years. We did this because we really think it's important that the UK thinks about how it's going to be successful into the future and really compete against the best in the world. It's a combination of what industry needs to do, what government needs to do, and what regulators need to do. And by working together, we believe we really can achieve this ambitious goal. But it's a journey, and today we wanted to update you on the progress that we've been making towards achieving our strategic objectives over the last year, and to provide you with a couple of case studies, one about how we spearheaded reform of the UK's business mobility visa system, and also some of the work we've been doing to strengthen the UK's international competitiveness further. So to begin today's briefing, I'm going to introduce you to Edward Braham, who I'm sure many of you know. He's the chair of MNG, and he's also been the most fantastic chair of our International Trade and Investment Group, ITIG, which is responsible for setting our international strategy. Edward is going to run through some of the core priorities that are set out in the international strategy and talk about our progress towards securing the policy reforms that we need. Edward, can I please hand over to you?
Thank you, Nikki, and hello, everyone. September a year ago feels more than a year ago to many of us, but and an awful lot has been done. It was then that we launched the international strategy, and as Nikki says, this was done in consultation both in the industry, with regulators, with ministers and government. We spoke to more than 60 senior decision makers within industry and a great many beyond that. And when it landed, it was respected as being different because it was not just a policy objective, it was also seen to be actionable. And that strategy is now providing the framework for all of our international work. As Nikki said, the core strategy objective was and remains to make the UK the world's leading international financial centre by 2026. And to achieve this, we said that UK industry, government and regulators needed to work together to do three fundamental things. The first is to secure the competitiveness of the UK's financial centre. The second is to grow the addressable market, which is open to industry businesses. And the third, and perhaps most fundamental, is to build new UK capabilities in financial innovation, sustainable finance, international investment, and risk management. Now, why did we pick those capabilities? It's because they were seen to be the key areas of growth of the future, and therefore the areas that would underpin medium and longer term success. And we were clear that we needed to deliver on each of those pillars at the same time and work on the short, medium and longer term elements in parallel and not sequentially. So over the last year, we've actually achieved a number of the policy asks, maybe most of the policy asks, which we set out in the first year of our strategy. And that was thanks to the collective efforts of all of the UK's financial and related professional services industry. And indeed, one of the significant developments has been the close working relationships with the trade teams at the Professional Business Services Council and the City of London Corporation. I thought it'd be helpful to give some examples of the progress that we have made. On the first pillar of our strategy, which is securing competitiveness, and after a lot of industry advocacy work, the UK government has instituted a review of short-term mobility policy, and it's now signalling that much needed visa reforms will take place. The government also supported capital market reforms and adopted some of our recommendations on how to improve the UK's new investment screening system. On the second pillar, which is about growing trade and investment, I've got 4 things. The first is that the UK and Singapore concluded a digital economy agreement, which included provisions that we urged in order to boost UK-Singapore trade. India followed our recommendation to establish a new dispute resolution centre to help UK businesses in India to secure access to justice. We helped Kenyan authorities launch the Nairobi International Financial Centre, and we secured the inclusion of language that protected cross-border insurance trades in the FTAs with Australia and New Zealand. The third pillar, as I said, involves building our capabilities in financial innovation, sustainable finance, and international investment. On innovation, the TheCityUK produced a report titled Digital Trade, a Commercially Viable Approach, zappy title, hey? Which mapped out how industry uses data and offered recommendations to the government on how to position the UK as a global data hub. I'd like to thank everyone who gave their time and expertise to build the evidence base that underpins this report, as it was clear when we started that there was insufficient understanding of the practical problems that need to be addressed. On sustainable finance, we successfully lobbied the G7 to adopt common green finance disclosure standards. We also worked with the TheCityUK's Green Finance and Innovation Group to create a policy explainer for officials on how to make the UK the world's leading green finance centre. And on investment, we helped officials craft more commercially effective pitches to global investors, and we shared recommendations with the government on how to administer the UK's new investment screening regime. We've also seen some encouraging progress to the longer term strategy delivery this year, but there's no room for complacency. There are many threats to the UK's competitive position, and James is going to touch on some of those in his comments. Looking forward, we remain committed to boosting trade and investment in financial and professional services. Our priorities include the following. The first is securing a UK-Switzerland mutual recognition agreement, under which UK and Switzerland financial regulators will permit significant cross-border market access in financial services. Second is pursuing a UK-US digital trade agreement and deepening industry input into the UK-US regulatory dialogues. Third, persuading India to reform its fintech regulations to liberalise its reinsurance markets and support UK-India capital markets connectivity. We're looking to revive the UK-China economic diplomacy dialogues. We're looking to secure an agreement on e-commerce at the WTO. We're looking to contribute to the government's efforts to support the reconstruction of Ukraine. And lastly, we're looking at partnering with the government on a development project to build a new international financial centre in Vietnam. Quite some list. If any of you would like to be involved in this work or have ideas on how to secure these objectives, then please do follow up with us afterwards. And finally, before handing back to Nikki, I'd like to thank her, Richard Hill and John Cook for all they've done. This has been an amazing team effort within ITIG and across the financial and professional services industry. But without them, little, if any of this, would have been achieved. Thank you again. Nikki, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Edward. That's very kind. I have to say it isn't a remarkable team effort, and a big call out to all the trade associations who've worked alongside us, as well as all the members who've been involved in different projects. This has been one of the most interactive groups that I work with, and it's been really fantastic to see the combined effort that we've all been able to make and achieve by being really clear on the outcomes that we're driving towards. One of those areas that really came up early in the consultation on the strategy was mobility. It's impacting on basically any business that's trying to do work internationally and is causing a huge amount of frustration. It's the simple things that people have been complaining about, like the ability to bring over a senior manager from Paris or from New York in order to do some training over here in the UK. The cost and the length of time that it's taking in order to be able to get the appropriate visa approvals was just really starting to weigh on business and the competitiveness of the UK. So together with Seema Farazi, who is the partner and head of immigration at EY, and our colleagues at the City of London Corporation, we embarked on a really concerted advocacy campaign to change the way in which the government is viewing short-term business mobility. We think it was a bit of an unintended consequence of some of the changes that came around during Brexit. And as a result of that, it was something that we felt we could really have a good crack at changing. So I'm going to invite Seema now to talk us through a bit of a case study of some of the really practical ways in which we've been trying to make a difference for business. Over to you, Seema.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for that introduction. It's lovely to be with you all this morning. So we have, as Nicola said, we've been working with the City UK since 2018 to really map out some of the industry's most challenging issues around business mobility, and to work with government to change policies to really address industry priorities. It will not be, nobody's going to be surprised for me to say that there's a huge amount of movement that continues to happen in the immigration space more broadly in the UK. But I think one of the things that we've been encouraged by throughout this process is the appetite to engage and to listen to business and to think about what are the practical reforms that will make a significant difference for UK competitiveness. We've obviously engaged in quite an extensive stakeholder journey with many of you on this call, no doubt, and with kind of broader industry stakeholders to understand some of the most challenging issues. And when we do that work, one of the most pressing concerns that we're constantly hearing and that we see in our practice as well is around short-term mobility. We know that there have been huge reforms to the bulk of the business side of the immigration system, a lot of improvements delivered in 2021 with resident labour market testing, dropping, broadening of skills levels, etc., to make sure that there was greater access to talent that businesses need. But there are particular challenges around short-term mobility. So we focused very heavily on the very hard line that sits between business type activities. So somebody that is coming for potentially short-term project work, and they're coming from a corporate structure that's related to a corporate structure in the UK, and they're not integrating into UK labour markets. They're here for a very short period of time and they're not working. And how that sits and aligns to those that are coming to the UK for work permits. So those are needed for long-term work. And what we heard in all of those conversations was that the line between those two is rather arbitrary. So, for example, a business visitor may be coming into the UK to take client meetings, that's going to be permitted, but they may be in a position of responsibility and they may have work that they have to do that relates to their overseas role, or there may be some activities that the UK business requires them to perform in the UK. And under the current rules, that's incredibly challenging because business visits are very constrained in what an individual can do. And that means that you can very easily stray into doing an activity that is prohibited, which is why most companies that we speak to in our stakeholder engagement invest huge amounts of money in staying on the right side of compliance and in managing that risk effectively. Now, one of the challenges of that system is, of course, the resource that goes into managing compliance. But on the flip side, if individuals are being assessed as, you might be coming into London for a 4-day trip, but you're actually working and therefore you need a visa. That's pretty hard to hear for some businesses, because usually those trips have to happen without very much advance notice. And as you heard from Nicola just now, the process to obtain the right visa to permit even very short periods of work can be particularly challenging. There is a process that is there, but it's time consuming, it's costly, and it delays speed to land when a business may have a critical need for someone to do some work in the UK for very short periods of time. Now, the volume of travel between the UK and the EU and other parts of the world is very high. Obviously, in the pandemic, volumes subsided, but we've seen volumes really pick up around business travel with some fervour in the last 6 to 12 months. And what Brexit has done is it has brought a whole other cohort of individuals into the immigration system. So if I just explain that for a second. A French national, for example, coming into the UK pre-Brexit would not have had to worry about, do I need a visa or do I not? Am I doing a permitted business visit activity or do I have to get a work permit? Because they had rights of free movement. And therefore their travel into the UK was very fluid. It did not require vast expense by the business. It did not require vast planning. Post-Brexit, of course, all EU nationals are now falling under the UK's immigration system, as US nationals, Canadian nationals, Indian nationals, Australian nationals, and everybody else. And that means that the volume of people that are impacted by this challenge has gone up. And that is having quite an acute, that's presented quite acute pressure for business. Now, if you add to that the fact that we've seen some of the most turbulent times in immigration in my 25 years or so of practice, with the pandemic and with the war in Ukraine really challenging the ability of the UK to process visas while they're prioritising those in need of international protection. That has created acute challenges for business, where they might have needed a person or a group of people to perform very short-term productive work. The business visit visa has not been open to them, and the work permit visa has in some cases taken 12 weeks. So the gap has really, that we talked about pre all of this, has really been exacerbated by what we've seen over the last year. Now, we published 2 reports on business mobility. So one in September 2020 on international trade agreements and UK policy, and again in September 2021 on global talent mobility, where we really focused on some of these challenges and set out why, with an evidence base, they are challenging UK competitiveness. And we suggested that the UK should reform the ICT route to enable employees to come into the UK to conduct this very short-term activity without needing a work visa. Now, one of the things that we've worked very closely with the TheCityUK to do is to always present a solution. Immigration is a very difficult issue. It remains highly charged. It's always featuring in political discussions. And we know that there is a very strong need to ensure public integrity, to ensure that there is a dual narrative around building up skills in the domestic pipeline. So what we've always tried to do is focus on solutions and presenting solutions to these challenges that are operationally achievable for the government. And I think as a result of that kind of very practical focus, we were able last year to convince the UK government's official advisory body, the Migration Advisory Committee, to endorse this recommendation when they were doing their review on the intercompany transfer route. And following that endorsement and lots of discussions that we had as a group, Rishi Sunak, in his role as Chancellor, decided to support this reform. And he led an initiative by HM Treasury which was basically a whole of government policy review to support this visa reform. It was a big step forward, really, from a business perspective, that HMT had taken this lead. And they asked the TheCityUK to build an evidence base for why this was going to be critical for business. The TheCityUK had obviously interviewed many of you on the call, talking to business, etc., to gather examples of these kind of frictions, sharing them with Treasury, the Home Office, BAIS, and the Department for International Trade officials. via policy workshops, policy papers, and other discussions. And of course, we've all worked collectively with ministers and MPs to really help them try and understand why this type of mobility reform matters so much. And again, we often find that there are lots of well-intentioned reforms, but listening to business as to exactly what is the key pressure point has been a little bit of a gap, and we think that that gap has really closed in the last couple of years. So the government has analysed the evidence that we've presented from that policy review over this summer that's just gone, and they've been considering all of their steps. And a few months ago now, the government signalled, if you saw it in the FT, that it was planning to reform the UK's ICT routes and bring in some changes around short-term mobility to alleviate some of these pressures for business. Now, although obviously the changes in governments have delayed some of that, development, so we've not had the official announcement of policy change, we're very confident from the discussions that we're having with government that the reform will come soon. And HMT officials leading the policy review have also said that the industry's strong voice in business mobility, and thank you to everyone in the stakeholder group for their hard work on that, has been key to making this change happen. We have also seen the CBI recently endorse all of these recommendations in the report, and particularly this one around short-term mobility. And its Trade and Services Council has asked the government to really act on these requests as a top priority. We remain continually in touch with government, monitoring to see if the reforms will be announced, but also making sure that the reforms are the reforms that are needed and that they are delivering the practical benefit that businesses need. And I think, Nicola, just before I hand back to you, this really is a landmark reform piece, not just for UK businesses, but it really puts the UK on a most competitive level with its global counterparts. We're very excited that we've all been collectively successful in really championing a change that is going to advance the UK and really put the UK at the forefront of innovation in immigration policy. Thanks, Nicola.
Grant, thanks, Seema. And it's been fantastic to be part of the team with you on this. And a great example of how if you have a really clear ask, and then if you have a really dedicated, concentrated advocacy campaign that is quite relentless, and understand who makes the decision and how to get to them, you will be able to really make a big difference here. So that's a great example. And but it's not been an easy time this year. And as Edward highlighted, I don't think we could have expected such a turbulent year. We maybe hoped that following COVID, things might settle down a bit, but clearly that's not been the case. And geopolitical risk is something that has really come to the fore over the last year. And through the ITIG, we've been really trying to think about how to address some of that, both in terms of how we might continue to reassure international investors about the credentials of the UK, but also to try and identify some of the issues ahead that we're really going to need to focus on if the UK is going to remain a really competitive destination to attract investment into. And James Palmer, who many of you would know, is a partner at Freehills and also the head and chair of our legal services group, has been a real advocate for really making us think about some of the challenges that are ahead and some of the ways in which we can work together from a business perspective to really highlight these issues and work to solve for them. So I might invite James to come and share his ideas with us. And can I please encourage you as we go to post any questions that you might have about either the work we're doing on mobility, the work we're doing on geopolitical risk, or any of those future areas of opportunity that Edward highlighted around India, around the US, or around the Indo-Pacific work, and of course our European work and our Swiss work in the chat, and we'd be happy to take your questions. But over to you for now, please, James.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Thank you for the kind comments and also all the hard work that has been done. And I think there's some related themes to what Seema was talking about here, but I'm going to talk about some different contexts. Just before I start to talk a little bit about what the City UK has been doing through the International Trade and Investment Group, I just thought to set the scene, I just emphasise that it seems to me obvious, but it can be lost sight of, that the UK's international competitiveness rests to significant part on the UK offering investors a predictable, stable, and business-friendly policy and regulatory regime. Importantly, it's also got to offer a predictable, stable, and business-friendly regime for those trying to launch or build businesses themselves. So it's both the investor side and the business side. And I think that the reality is that over the last year, while there are some encouraging signs from some in government, and we know, for example, that the Prime Minister and the Chief Secretary are believers in not eliminating every risk. I was thrilled at the headline in the Times a few weeks ago from the Prime Minister saying something I hadn't seen any leading politician in this country say for a long time: the government cannot fix all risks and all problems. And so we know there are some good signs there, but I also think that the stability of the UK's investment environment continues to be brought into question, with initiatives that superficially or maybe in substance have good goals, but actually have not been properly thought through. The TheCityUK's International Trade and Investment Group has sought to enhance the stability of the UK's investment environment. It's a key focus. In addition to pursuing a policy reform agenda in the way that Edward and Seema have outlined, trying to drive a forward-looking focus, the group has also provided ministers and senior officials with suggested talking points on how to encourage more financial institutions to invest in the UK and establish new business units here. ITIG also prepared defensive talking points for senior government officials to help them field questions from international investors and others on the stability of the UK's investment environment and convey the message that the UK was still open for business and indeed committed to it. We shared these key messages with UK ambassadors and trade commissions around the world, and the TheCityUK is currently conducting one-to-one briefings with these officials in order to help them understand how best to articulate the attractiveness of the UK's investment environment overseas. Looking at the UK policy agenda more broadly, while there are these signs that the UK government in some cases gets the need for better policies in certain areas, the government is, I'm afraid, still making some fundamental errors in places that hold it back from pursuing more internationally competitive policies. And I think there's some underlying themes through this which are problematic, and I think flow in part from the way politics works now, the immediacy of online reactions, but I also think they flow from complexity and the fact that global interactions, global intersections are just more complicated, and putting forward one idea has so many knock-ons that people may not have thought about. I think in particular, what we see is still troubling levels of risk aversion. In our view, we have to stop trying to eliminate every risk, picking up on my quote about the Prime Minister a few weeks ago, or assuming every business failure is a regulatory or legal failure. It may be deeply problematic to have a major institution with significant social dependency on it collapse, but businesses do sometimes need to fail, because if no business is ever launched that fails, we're not going to be launching the businesses of the future. We do not have perfect foresight as to what we need ahead. And I'm afraid I think there is a real problem over that mindset. Secondly, I think there's a very significant tendency to see changes in law and regulations as a way of sending a political signal, showing that the government or regulator has done something. But actually, they do that without any evidence-based policy making and without a proper analysis of the costs. And I can understand why people do it, because it's easier to do that in many cases than to actually change the underlying problem. But it means that we have extraordinary levels of regulatory churn, which we've taken for granted. But when I started on regulatory and legislative policy nearly 30 years ago, it was very unusual to have even one or two significant changes to business regulation in the UK in a single year. We now have hundreds, and I think that is an issue. And thirdly, the other point I'd draw out, I think, is lack of joined up policy making. And I think it relates to the complexity issue and the immediate response issues that we're facing. But ultimately, if we don't fix this, the problems are going to get worse and the environment is not going to get better. So simply saying that's life, that's politics, I think is not good enough. And I'll talk in a moment about some of the terrible examples that we're still seeing despite good intentions. Now, let's reassure ourselves, no country is perfect. But the truth is other leading financial centres and professional services centres are doing a better job at allowing markets to function properly, pursuing evidence-based policy making, and practicing joined-up government. I'm not going to take you through endless examples, but we all know that in Asia and the US, attitudes to risk are different. Fear of overburdening business is different. And a desire to compete successfully is much more embedded, and risk acceptance flows through all of that. That doesn't mean any of those are soft touch jurisdictions. If we're talking Singapore or New York, for example, in particular, but it does mean they understand the global context they're operating in and are looking for a proportionate balance. Although the changes in government have, just to carry on, the policy issues that I particularly want to draw out just as examples of the problems we've got are some specific, frankly, rather basic errors flowing downstream from the context I've just set out. The UK stance to EU retained law, the desire to incorporate it into UK law with reforms or have the relevant EU law fall away, all EU law within, frankly, preposterous deadlines that couldn't be handled by businesses and couldn't be handled by government, but which government have been slow to move away from, false promises, to be blunt. And those really represent change for change's sake rather than a prioritized, reflective focus on what's actually going to lead the UK to succeed. The motives may have been pro those goals, but it was a poor way of going about it. Again, there are some signals the government is reconsidering that, which is good. The terrifying new proposed foreign influence registration scheme that the Home Office is taking forward, the ultimate example of siloed policy making without consultation, probably the worst I've seen in nearly 30 years of engagement on new legislative proposals. This regime effectively says any foreign organisation, including UK subsidiary, foreign subsidiaries of UK companies, foreign branches working in the UK, foreign charities, foreign NGOs, all need to publicly register each engagement with a policy maker and to disclose sufficient information about it. Effectively, all foreign organisations are treated as suspicious. This is clearly preposterous, as we are showing and arguing with government, but it's gone through the House of Commons and it's still got no focus and has not had public attention, a matter we're trying to change over the next couple of days. I think the over-regulation of public markets, both driving equity markets, new equity market participation to other jurisdictions. Lord Hill's excellent reforms are really the tip of the iceberg of what we need. We need a lot more. But overwhelmingly, the drive away from public markets with lower cost disintermediated investment to higher cost private markets. That doesn't seem to me something that legislators should necessarily be supporting. And I think that, again, there is a real issue with failures of UK policies to encourage savings. We do not make it easy by overprotecting people. I think we are excluding vast swathes of the population from saving and investing and building resilience in the UK from the shocks that arise, whether it's energy costs or other challenges. If people haven't got savings, they're not able to address those or fund their retirement. The state has to do that. And we know where that leads us. I think also we just need to recognize that if we're going to have the capital for the state not to fix everything, saving and investment need to be encouraged. I think overall there's a fear of stepping back at and looking at cost proportionality of legislation and regulation and the cost of regulatory churn. In all these cases, industry needs to work hard to help different parts of government, e.g. the Home Office, BEIS and others, understand the impact of their policy agendas, usually well-intended or at least responsive to a ministerial well-intended suggestion, on UK competitiveness and guide policymakers towards more proportionate and evidence-based policy solutions. I do think ultimately this needs political leadership And I do think we need, as business, to just wonder whether it's time to stop self-policing as to how much we challenge, politely but bluntly, government, and whether we need to be a bit blunter, still politely, still respectful, still understanding policy goals. But I do think, going right back to the financial crisis and then Brexit, we've had a bit of a sense of, well, we can't raise that point, we can't be seen to criticize. And I think that in a way is unfortunately allowing this momentum to continue. That is enough for me. I'm going to hand back to Nicola. Thank you all.
Thanks, James. Well, that was a great way of highlighting some of the challenges that that still lie ahead for us as we really seek to position the UK as a leading international financial centre. And all of the points that you talk about may, on the first instance, sound very domestic, but a lot of the points that I make when I talk about these to government is about the fact that this all impacts on how attractive the UK is as a jurisdiction to come and set up your business in. The UK is not the only place in the world where companies can go, and if we keep making it very hard for them and very unattractive and expensive and difficult, then they will start to choose other locations despite all the advantages that the UK offers. So thank you for that. Can I please ask the other panelists to now turn on your cameras, because we're now at the opportunity for some Q&A. So if I could please ask if anybody has any questions they'd like to pose to the panel, then please do so. I've got two questions that have come in so far. One is really asking about what have been some of the main challenges that we have faced this year. I might have a quick crack at that, and then I don't know, Edward or James, if you want to jump in from your perspective as well on this one. Obviously, we've seen a huge amount of economic protectionism starting to grow, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Europe, whether sometimes here in the UK or in many other countries. It really is influencing a lot of the work that we're trying to do. We see it around investment protection and the increased kind of screening regimes and the limitations on what kind of investment people want to be able to have in their jurisdictions, but also in areas like data. 85% of the traded services in our industry are already undertaken digitally, and data localization and storage requirements are imposing a huge impost on business, and also really starting to call into question the ability to offer a global service. So those have certainly been some of the challenges that we've been fighting quite hard on in these areas. And I also just say one of the benefits perhaps of this, and let me just try and being an Australian, I always try and look for a slight optimistic angle to everything, is what we have seen is because of the UK status under the Five Eyes regime, because it is a large part of other alliances, whether it be NATO or other geopolitical constellations, it does have the potential to leverage that to good effect within some of these new geopolitical workings. We need to be very careful though, because at the end of the day, what most of us want is a balanced and open trading environment, and just forming new clusters of sort of enclaves for trade and investment may not be the best long-term approach, even though it may offer the UK some short-term benefits. It's certainly something that we're really thinking through in ITIG at the moment, and as you may know, ITIG has the chairs of all our different market advisory groups on it, from China to the US to India, the Indo-Pacific, and so on. So it brings a really good broad range of perspectives. Edward, was there anything you wanted to add, or James, to this?
Let's take a different angle. So there's clearly a huge amount which has been going on, which is sort of running interference. I think one of the challenges this year has been keeping our focus. We chose, one of the, as I said when I spoke, one of the things we did when we put the strategy together was think forward. and we said most of what's going to happen over the next little bit is already it's already pre-wired. But if we're going to get where we need to get to, we need to be thinking about the changes we need for the future. Now, as all the chaos goes on around the place, there's a tendency to sort of lift our eyes and try and respond to the very short term. And I think we've got to have the confidence to stick to the game plan. Sure, we can reevaluate whether it's still the right game plan, but until we change our minds, we should stick to what we're doing. And I think this, one of the things that's happened over the last year, and we should keep going on it, is quite religiously going through the strategy piece by piece, progressing it as we go. So I think avoiding distraction would be my key message.
Great, thank you, Edward. I like that one. As you say, there's a long-term game to be played here as well. The next question is, James, it's specifically for you. You've obviously scared a lot of people on this call. So the question is, you said that the foreign influence registration scheme has already passed through the Commons. So what can industry do right now to engage with government on the new scheme?
Contact them immediately over it, because it's went through a rushed consultation. The bill started with some perfectly sensible proposals that have been through the Law Commission and extensive consultation. The first two parts of the bill are not our focus. It's part 3 of the bill, introduced in the last 2 weeks of Boris Johnson and Priti Patel's leadership of Priti Patel as Home Secretary, and off the back of a hurried, brief consultation, which had very limited responses. It did have a TheCityUK response, which we worked on, and it did have a response from my firm and from the Bar Council and a few others who we've been in touch with, challenging it, pointing out that it's frankly completely unworkable. Please contact those of you with relationships at number 10. Please contact them. If you're a foreign organization and you've got contacts with your embassy, please get them to look at it. Please just look briefly. I am not exaggerating. It is completely unworkable. And I will presumptuously give 2 examples. If the wife of the president of a country facing invasion by a foreign power is also the president of a charity in her foreign country, and she were to visit the UK, let's say last week, and she was to seek to meet policymakers in the UK to talk about the fundraising work her charity is doing for hospitals in that country that has been invaded, she would need to register. And each meeting would need to be registered. And she would need to have registered before she spoke to anybody, even if the meetings needed to be fixed at short notice. And anybody who arranged meetings after she had, for example, unwittingly had a meeting that had not been pre-registered, anybody who'd been at that meeting and then fixed further meetings is themselves committing a criminal offence punishable by 2 years in prison, as the foreign leader's wife would be as well. Another example is a human rights activist seeking to come to the UK on behalf of a charity, similarly has to pre-register, even if there's no confidentiality exemptions. Foreign businesses will have to register if they want to meet with policymakers, to anything that may influence the views of a peer. In fact, there's even a ridiculous position that most of the requirement is you're trying to influence a policymaker on government policy. But actually, if you're trying to influence an MP or a peer, any influence on them appears to be caught, including strong recommendations. I mean, it is the worst drafted piece of legislation I have seen, as I said, in 28.5 years of looking at new legislative proposals. Please engage, please follow up. We will be disseminating examples of the problems it causes, and please make noise in the Lords. It needs urgent response.
Thanks, James. A call to action for us all. Seema, the next question is for you. It says, beyond the short-term mobility issues that you've raised around fixing the intercompany transfer visa and maybe some of the definitions of what a business visitor is allowed to do, what else could we do to improve UK business mobility? Have we got a further set of asks that we're working on?
We do, and they're actually in the Global Talent Mobility Report. So there are certainly some outstanding asks in that report, focused on alleviating some of the cost pressure within the system, and we've actually started to see some of that pull through. So one of the biggest costs that sit in the immigration system comes from the immigration skills charge, and we've seen that a differentiated approach started to be taken to the immigration skills charge, which is welcome news, where in some categories or in some cases the immigration skills charge is not payable. That's very important because it really reduces the burden on employers. And as part of the work that we've done, we've kind of heat mapped the UK against all of its competitors to see where it does really well and where it does not so well. And certainly one of the areas that is most pressured for the UK is around cost. The cost of the immigration system is incredibly high when you look at the skills charge and the health surcharge. But the one that we've said there could be a little bit more flexibility around is on the very heavy skills charge. And just to put some context on that, for somebody who's coming in to support a UK business for 3 years, on top of the visa costs, on top of the contribution to the NHS, the business is paying £3,000 for the 3 years of visa on top of all of those costs. It's comparatively not very competitive, I think we'd say. Two other things that we're focused on, which are really, really topical right now for both for different reasons. The first is around this phenomena of work anywhere that we saw during the pandemic, and the phenomena of work anywhere across borders and some of the challenges that that creates. So there is an ongoing discussion, and again, we talked about it in the report, Nicola, last year, but there is an ongoing discussion around what is the right infrastructure to support new ways of working. Everything has changed post-pandemic. Things are not going back to how they were in all aspects of life, and some of that is for the good. So how can the infrastructure around tax, social security and immigration evolve, and employment law evolve to create a much more agile workforce for employers? And the final piece is around one that is around employability of refugees. It seems incredible that we have skills gaps in the UK. We're seeing these same labour challenges globally. And there is a very strong cohort of individuals who are in the UK lawfully or in other jurisdictions lawfully with ability to work, but with no comprehensive pathway into employment. And so what we would really welcome is that kind of public-private partnership to really support individuals in becoming economically independent and contributing to society, and also kind of supporting the skills gaps in the economy. And I think we know that the government is kind of shifting focus to refugee employability programs now in the coming months and years. So that's encouraging.
Thanks, Seema. And I had the chance to have breakfast with Matthew Rycroft the other day, who's the permanent secretary at the department, the Home Office, and he was also saying that the sort of the point system and the skills shortage list is now starting to be much more actively used. So again, if you are experiencing particular skill shortages where you need to bring in international talent to fix gaps, this is now really starting to be geared up. So do please let us know where you're experiencing those, and we can help with some of the advocacy work around that. I've got 2 more questions, so I'm going to move forward quickly. I'm conscious of time. One of them I might need to bring Richard Hill onto the screen for. The question was around the mutual recognition agreement with Switzerland, and if there is an opportunity for us to be able to extend that model to other markets. And I know that's something, Richard, you've been doing some thinking on.
Yes, thank you, Nikki. We're currently starting a project exploring whether we could secure agreements with countries like maybe Singapore or Japan that deepen financial regulatory cooperation between our markets along the model of the UK-Switzerland Mutual Recognition Agreement. And so we are writing out to our members now to seek views on this. We're speaking in particular to members of the ASEAN Market Advisory Group and the Japan Market Advisory Group, as well as members of our Liberalization of Trade in Services Group, to see if people have any ideas or suggestions about how we could best deepen financial regulatory cooperation between the UK and Japan and Singapore, or indeed if we should be considering deeper regulatory cooperation with other markets via mutual recognition agreements. And so if any of you on the call have any ideas about this, please do get in touch with us. We would really love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And it may not be exactly the same model as for Switzerland, but the concept is, how can we look at more innovative and deeper ways of getting to either some kind of deference or mutual recognition arrangements that allow us to move a lot faster and give us a much stronger, sustainable cooperation into the future. The other question that's come in is about how are we engaging with with Labour on the trade and investment work that we're doing. And I might just start with that and because I think that's probably more of a City UK question. And the answer is that we obviously are talking very much to Labour as well as to the current administration on these issues. So I'm delighted to say that for our international conference that hopefully you all have in your calendar for the 20th of April next year, the first person to accept the invitation to speak is Nick Thomas Simons, who is very keen to be talking to us about Labour's vision for trade and investment going forward. And we've also been having a series of roundtables with different members of the opposition to brief them on the views that we've been taking around various issues to do with trade and investment, and obviously on the domestic policy side of things as well. So it's something that we are very happy to share with all people who are willing to listen to us and certainly understand the need to be communicating on both sides at the moment. I think that's it for questions, and I am conscious of time, and I know Edward loves to be able to give a few minutes back into everybody's diaries. So I may just take a moment to thank everybody for joining today. I hope you found it interesting. We would really love to hear from you about any of the work that we're doing, and I really would like to take a moment to thank many of you who've contributed your views, your ideas, and your support for this agenda. As Edward said, we really are trying to make a really practical difference to the ease of doing business internationally and the ability for the UK to bring more international players into the financial centre that we have here in the UK. And most of all, what we would really love to see is this forward-leaning agenda of the UK really positioning itself as one of the most important hubs in the world for the future growth of the industry, because that's what's going to bring prosperity right across the UK, bring us new, interesting, sustainable jobs, and a chance to really be part of what I think is one of the most exciting global ecosystems that I've had the privilege to work in. So thank you all very much. Please stay tuned and keep a sight out for our regular updates. And thank you very much and have a lovely day.